But it will be claimed that our idea of the non-existent is not yet sufficiently cut loose from every imaginative element, that it is not negative enough. No matter, we shall be told, though the unreality of a thing consists in its exclusion by other things. We want to know nothing about that. Are we not free to direct our attention where we please and how we please? Well then, after having called up the idea of an object, and thereby, if you will have it so, supposed it existent, we shall merely couple to our affirmation a not, and that will be enough to make us think it non-existent. This is an operation entirely intellectual, independent of what happens outside the mind. So let us think of anything, or let us think of the totality of things, and then write in the margin of our thought the not, which prescribes the rejection of what it contains. We annihilate everything mentally by the mere fact of decreeing its annihilation. Here, we have it. The very root of all the difficulties and errors with which we are confronted is to be found in the power ascribed hereto, negation. We represent negation as exactly symmetrical with affirmation. We imagine that negation, like affirmation, is self-sufficient, so that negation, like affirmation, would have the power of creating ideas, with this sole difference that they would be negative ideas. By affirming one thing and then another, and so on ad infinitum, I form the idea of all. So, by denying one thing and then other things, finally by denying all, I arrive at the idea of nothing. But it is just this assimilation which is arbitrary. We fail to see that while affirmation is a complete act of the mind, which can succeed in building up an idea, negation is but the half of an intellectual act, of which the other half is understood, or rather put off to an indefinite future. We fail to see that while affirmation is a purely intellectual act, there enters into negation an element which is not intellectual, and that is precisely to the intrusion of this foreign element that negation owes its specific character. To begin with the second point, let us note that to deny always consists in setting aside a possible affirmation. Negation is only an attitude taken by the mind toward an eventual affirmation. When I say, this table is black, I am speaking of the table. I have seen it black, and my judgment expresses what I have seen. But if I say, this table is not white, I surely do not express something I have perceived, for I have seen black, and not an absence of white. It is therefore at bottom not on the table itself that I bring the judgment to bear, but rather on the judgment that would declare the table white. I judge a judgment and not the table. The proposition, this table is not white, implies that you might believe it white, that you did believe it such, or that I was going to believe it such. I warn you or myself that this judgment is to be replaced by another, which it is true I leave undetermined. Thus, while affirmation bears directly on the thing, negation aims at the thing only indirectly, through an interposed affirmation. An affirmative proposition expresses a judgment on an object. A negative proposition expresses a judgment on a judgment. Negation, therefore, differs from affirmation properly so called in that it is an affirmation of the second degree. It affirms something of an affirmation which itself affirms something of an object.